I was Alexander Hale's wife. Not because he wanted me, but because the Empire demanded it. Our marriage was supposed to be nothing more than business, two names on paper, two strangers under the same roof. At least, that's what we told everyone. But standing beside him at the charity gala, his hand pressed against the small of my back like it belonged there, I knew he was lying. His voice was low, velvet and dangerous, when another man's gaze lingered too long on me. Enjoying the view, he asked the stranger, his smile polite while his grip on me tightened. I should have pulled away. Instead, I leaned closer, whispering sweetly just loud enough for him to hear, "Careful, Alexander. People might think you actually care." For a split second, his mask cracked. His eyes darkened, hot enough to burn through me. And then, he turned his head, mouth close to my ear, his words like a spark to gasoline. "Maybe I do." The world blurred. Applause echoed from across the hall, glasses clinked, cameras flashed, but all I could feel was his breath against my skin. His hand slid deliberately down my back before he released me and stepped forward to greet the mayor as if nothing had happened. My pulse was racing, my cheeks burning, and I hated how much control he had over me with so little effort. Later, during the toast, he raised his glass with that infuriating smirk. "To my wife," he said smoothly, eyes locking with mine. "The only reason I'm even tolerable at these things." Everyone laughed, charmed by his wit, but beneath the table his knee brushed against mine. I stiffened, glaring at him, but he only sipped his champagne, savoring my reaction. It was a game to him. And he was winning. When the speeches ended and the music began, I thought I'd finally escape. But Alexander caught my wrist in his and pulled me onto the dance floor before I could refuse. His hand settled at my waist, his touch scorching through the satin of my dress. We glided across the marble floor, perfectly in sync, the picture of marital bliss. To them, we looked untouchable. To me, it felt like a battle disguised as a waltz. "You're playing the role a little too well," I hissed through my smile. "Or maybe," he countered, his breath warm against my ear, "I'm not playing at all." I stumbled for half a beat, my heart leaping into my throat, but he tightened his hold, steadying me. His eyes bore into mine, something raw flickering there, something I refused to name. The song ended, and the applause brought me back to reality. I slipped out of his grip and walked away without looking back, forcing a smile for the cameras that followed me off the floor. But I could feel his gaze burning into me from across the room. By the time the gala ended, my head was spinning. The limo ride home was silent, thick with everything we hadn't said. I pressed myself against the door, staring out the window, refusing to give him the satisfaction of my attention. But when we finally pulled into the penthouse garage and the driver left us alone, Alexander's patience snapped. He shut the door behind us with a sharp click and turned on me, his tie undone, his jaw tight. "Do you enjoy provoking me in front of everyone?" His voice was low, lethal. I crossed my arms, standing my ground. "Do you enjoy pretending you don't care when you clearly do?" His eyes flared, his steps closing the distance until my back hit the wall. He caged me in with his arms, his face inches from mine. My pulse thundered, my breath caught, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But instead, he leaned closer, his voice a growl that sent heat rushing through me. "One day, Diana, you'll push me too far." And when that happens, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. The tension was suffocating, crackling like fire about to consume everything in its path. And then, silence. His chest rose and fell against mine, his gaze locked on my lips, his restraint hanging by a thread. His chest brushed mine with every breath, the heat of his body trapping me against the wall, yet Alexander didn't close the final distance. He held himself there like he was daring me to move first, daring me to admit what we both felt pulsing in the space between us. My hands twitched at my sides, itching to shove him away or pull him closer, I couldn't decide which. His eyes flicked down, catching the flicker of indecision in mine, and his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was too sharp, too dangerous. "Thought so," he murmured, pushing away from me just as suddenly as he'd cornered me. The loss of his heat was dizzying. I straightened my dress, forcing my breathing into control, while he loosened his cufflinks as if he hadn't just set me on fire. "Good night, Diana," he said casually, heading for his study. I hated how my pulse still raced long after he was gone. The days that followed were worse. Alexander became unbearable in his subtlety. He stopped with the sharp remarks and icy distance, but instead of giving me peace, he began hovering. Always close enough to be felt, never close enough to be called out. At breakfasts, his fingers would brush mine when passing the paper. During board luncheons, his arm would rest across the back of my chair, claiming space he had no right to claim. At night, when we returned to the penthouse, he no longer disappeared into his study. He lingered. Sometimes in the kitchen, pouring me a glass of wine without asking. Sometimes in the living room, undoing his tie and stretching out across from me like he belonged there. The man who once treated me like a stranger now treated me like a wife. The worst of it was how convincing he was. To the outside world, Alexander Hale was every inch the devoted husband. He held my hand as cameras flashed, brushed hair from my face when reporters swarmed, bent his head close like he was whispering endearments when really he was taunting me with lines like, "Smile a little wider, Diana, make them believe it." But the whispers that followed us didn't sound like mockery, they sounded like envy. They saw a power couple, untouchable and magnetic. And maybe that was the cruelest part, I couldn't tell where the performance ended and reality began. The tension reached its peak at a charity auction a week later. He stood behind me as I examined the display of artwork, his hand brushing the bare skin of my back where my gown dipped low. The touch was calculated, possessive, and the cameras devoured it. "You're making a scene," I hissed, keeping my smile fixed for the crowd. He leaned down, lips brushing my ear. "I'm making a point." I stiffened, turning my head just enough to meet his eyes, and what I saw there was not indifference. It was hunger. Real, unmasked hunger. My pulse skipped, my lips parting in a silent challenge. "Careful, Alexander," I whispered back. "You'll ruin your reputation." His smirk was pure sin. "It's already ruined, Diana. You married me. We won the auction, of course we did," Alexander never lost, and left to the sound of applause. But as soon as the limo door shut behind us, the polished facade cracked. I turned on him, fury burning hotter than my confusion. "What the hell are you doing?" His jaw clenched, but his gaze didn't waver. "What I should have been doing all along. Treating you like my wife." His words hit me like a physical blow. Wife. Not partner. Not pawn. Wife. My mouth went dry, my heart a mess of contradictions. "You don't mean that," I said finally, the words weak even to my own ears. He shifted closer, one hand braced beside me on the leather seat, his body crowding mine until I had nowhere to go. His scent was maddening, crisp cologne and heat and power. "Don't I?" His voice dropped to a growl, his eyes locked on mine. "Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me, Diana. And maybe I'll stop." I opened my mouth, but the lie wouldn't come. My silence was its own confession, and Alexander's lips twitched in something close to victory. His hand lifted, brushing my jaw in a touch so gentle it contradicted every harsh word he'd ever thrown at me. My breath caught, the air between us heavy, electric, dangerous. I hated him for doing this to me. I hated myself for wanting more. And just when I thought he'd break me with a kiss, the driver's voice came through the partition, announcing we'd arrived. Alexander's hand fell away. He leaned back casually, as if nothing had happened, while I sat trembling, every nerve alight. That night, I lay awake in the darkness of our shared room, listening to the even rhythm of his breathing beside me. We never shared more than a bed frame before, but he hadn't gone to the guest suite like usual. He stayed. And though we didn't touch, the space between us felt smaller than it ever had. I stared at the ceiling, every word unsaid burning holes into me, every almost touch searing itself into my skin. The mask of indifference had shattered. And neither of us knew how to put it back together. The next morning should have been normal. It should have been like every other morning in this cold penthouse where Alexander and I lived parallel lives. But when I walked into the dining room, he was already there, dressed in a crisp navy suit, sipping his coffee like he had been waiting for me. His eyes lifted the second I entered, sharp and unreadable, and for the first time I realized he wasn't pretending not to notice me. He was watching. He always watched. I sat across from him, determined to ignore the way my pulse betrayed me. The silence between us stretched taut, until he finally set his cup down and said, "You didn't sleep." I nearly choked on my own breath. He had noticed? My spine straightened, defenses snapping into place. "And how would you know?" His gaze didn't waver, steady and unnerving. "Because I didn't either." His words were too casual, but the weight behind them made my stomach twist. I turned back to my plate, pretending to be unbothered. But I couldn't shake the awareness of his stare, lingering, probing, dissecting me. That day, it was impossible to escape him. At the office, he appeared at my side during meetings, his hand brushing mine as he passed papers like it was deliberate. At lunch, he cornered me against the glass window of the top-floor lounge, his voice low enough to stir something dangerous in my chest. "They keep staring," he said, meaning the other executives, the assistants, the vultures who thrived on gossip. "You should be used to it by now." I arched a brow, forcing composure I didn't feel. "And why are they staring, Alexander?" His lips tilted into that infuriating half-smile. "Because they can't tell if I'm acting anymore." The words hit too close to home. I pushed past him, refusing to let him see how rattled I was, but the truth lingered like smoke, I couldn't tell either. By the time evening came, I had convinced myself I'd survive another night of pretending. But Alexander had other plans. We arrived at a gala in the city, all glitter and champagne and cameras flashing like lightning. It was supposed to be another performance. We'd smile, pose, and keep the empire untouchable. But when a guest, a man far too bold for his own good, took my hand and kissed it a second too long, Alexander's mask slipped. His hand came down over mine, firm and possessive, pulling it back with a force that left no doubt. "Enjoying yourself?" Alexander asked the man, his tone dangerously smooth. The other man stammered, retreating with apologies, but Alexander wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me. His jaw was tight, his eyes a storm, and when he leaned down, his whisper scorched my ear. "Do you enjoy making me jealous, Diana?" My breath caught, heat pooling low in my stomach, because it wasn't anger in his voice. It was hunger. And the way his hand stayed on mine told everyone watching that I belonged to him. The rest of the evening blurred. People spoke, deals were made, champagne flowed, but all I felt was the weight of Alexander's claim. He kept me close, closer than ever before, his arm locked around me like he dared anyone to challenge him. And for the first time I didn't fight it. Later, when we returned to the penthouse, I stormed ahead of him, fury and confusion colliding in every step. I slammed the door of our bedroom behind me, expecting him to go to his study like always. But the sound of the door opening again made my pulse spike. He followed. He didn't say a word at first. He just stalked across the room, loosening his tie, his eyes fixed on me with a ferocity that left no room to breathe. I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall. His hands braced on either side of me, trapping me in place, his breath harsh, his voice breaking in a growl that made my knees weak. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" The silence that followed was deafening. I should have answered. I should have pushed him away. But all I could do was stare, my heart pounding so violently it threatened to give me away. His chest rose and fell against mine, every breath a battle, every second a war neither of us wanted to win. I felt his heat, his power, his restraint threatening to shatter. And for the first time since I married him, I wondered if maybe Alexander Hale wasn't my enemy. Maybe he was the fire I'd been pretending I didn't crave. The air between us was molten, every inch of space charged with something I could neither name nor escape. His words hung over me, searing and unrelenting, and I hated how much they made me tremble. Do you have any idea what you do to me? His voice replayed in my head like a curse, like a promise, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to fight him or pull him closer. My palms pressed against the wall, my chest tight as I forced out a whisper. You don't get to say things like that. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move away. His hands stayed caged around me, his scent wrapping around me like chains. Why not? He said softly, dangerously, like he was daring me to admit the truth I had buried for months. I tilted my chin up, meeting his eyes, refusing to let him see me falter. Because this isn't real. We're not real. Something flickered in his expression, raw and unguarded, but it vanished just as quickly. He pushed off the wall, giving me space, though his eyes never left me. Maybe you should stop saying that if you don't believe it. His retreat should have felt like relief. Instead, it left me cold, trembling with everything unsaid. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every brush of his hand, every look that lingered too long, every word that sounded less like a lie and more like confession. I tried to convince myself it was nothing but heat and proximity. But deep down, I knew better. By morning, the city was already buzzing with rumors. Photos of Alexander holding me close at the gala had spread across every outlet, captions dripping with speculation. Indifferent? The Empire's golden couple looks anything but, one headline read. I slammed my phone down on the vanity, heat creeping up my neck. This was exactly what I didn't want, my life becoming fodder for their amusement. When I walked into the dining room, Alexander was already there, the newspaper open beside his untouched breakfast. The same headline screamed across the front page. He didn't look angry. He looked amused. They finally noticed, he said, sipping his coffee like it was the most casual thing in the world. My teeth clenched. You don't care that the world thinks we're suddenly in love? His eyes lifted to mine, sharp and steady. I care about what you think. The words lodged in my throat, cutting deeper than they should. I shook my head, desperate to break free from whatever spell he was weaving. Stop playing this game. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with that unreadable gaze that always left me on edge. I'm not playing, Diana. You're just afraid to admit you feel it too. His confidence infuriated me, but worse was the way it made my chest tighten, because he wasn't wrong. I felt it. I felt it in every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every moment that left me breathless. Later that week, the tension reached its breaking point. We attended another public event, and though I swore I'd stay composed, the universe had other plans. Daniel was there. The man who had once tried to court me before Alexander, arrogant and bitter in defeat. He cornered me while Alexander was across the room, his smile a cruel echo of the past. You really think he'll ever choose you? Daniel sneered. You're nothing but a pawn. He'll discard you like he does everyone else. My throat tightened, but before I could reply, a shadow fell over us. Alexander's hand closed over my waist, pulling me firmly against him, his voice lethal and low. Funny, he said to Daniel, his grip tightening like a warning. I don't remember you being invited into our marriage. Daniel bristled, his smirk faltering, but Alexander didn't give him the satisfaction of another word. He steered me away, his hand never leaving me, his body taut with restrained fury. The moment we stepped into the car, silence pressed down heavy, suffocating. I finally found my voice, shaky but sharp. You can't keep doing that, acting like I belong to you. His gaze snapped to mine, burning hot enough to strip me bare. Don't I? The car lurched forward, but all I could feel was the weight of his question, the dangerous truth hidden beneath it. My heart pounded, my breath caught, and when his hand brushed mine on the seat between us, I didn't pull away. The car ride felt endless, the city lights flashing past the tinted windows as if mocking the storm brewing inside me. His words reverberated in my chest like an echo I couldn't silence. Don't I? He sat beside me, his hand brushing against mine just enough to set my nerves alight, but he didn't move closer. He didn't need to. The space between us was already charged, thick with everything we hadn't dared say. When we arrived at the penthouse, the driver opened the door, and I stepped out first, desperate for distance. But Alexander followed, his stride deliberate, his presence swallowing the air around me. The elevator ride was suffocating. I kept my eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers, pretending the weight of his gaze didn't pin me in place. When the doors opened, I darted toward the bedroom, but his hand closed around my wrist before I could escape. He spun me gently but firmly, pressing me back against the mirrored wall of the hallway. My reflection showed a woman torn between fury and desire, her pulse racing, her lips parted in defiance she wasn't sure she could sustain. "You let him talk to you like that," Alexander said, his voice a dangerous whisper, his face inches from mine. "You think I'll stand by and watch someone belittle you?" I forced out a shaky laugh, trying to mask the way my chest heaved under his scrutiny. "You don't get to play the hero, Alexander. You've never cared before." His grip on my wrist tightened just slightly, just enough for me to feel the tremor of his restraint. "Haven't I?" The softness in his tone startled me more than the fury. My lips parted, but no words came. He leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "You drive me insane, Diana. Every smile you hide, every time you look at me like you wish I'd disappear. Do you have any idea what you do to me?" My body betrayed me, arching ever so slightly toward his heat. My throat was dry, my voice barely audible when I whispered back, "Then why do you act like none of this matters?" His eyes blazed, the mask he always wore cracking just enough for me to glimpse something raw beneath. "Because if I show you how much it does, I'm afraid I won't be able to stop." The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart thundered, my hands trembled at my sides, and for a moment, I thought he might finally kiss me. But then, as if sensing I was teetering on the edge, he pulled back abruptly, releasing my wrist. "Get some rest," he muttered, his voice rough, almost broken. He turned and walked away, leaving me pressed against the glass, my reflection staring back at me like a stranger. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his words, his nearness, the way his voice had cracked just enough to betray the truth he refused to admit. The next morning, I expected distance, silence, maybe even regret. Instead, when I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, his tie loose, a steaming cup of coffee waiting at my spot at the table. He didn't say a word, just pushed it toward me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that stole my breath. And that was the beginning of something I couldn't explain. Small shifts. Subtle changes. He stopped ignoring me at events, instead pulling me closer, introducing me as though I was more than just a name on paper. At home, he lingered in the kitchen when I cooked, brushed his hand against mine when he passed me the salt. He started walking me to the door in the mornings, waiting at the elevator until it closed. Each moment was nothing. Each moment was everything. The indifference we'd sworn to uphold was unraveling thread by thread, leaving me tangled in something dangerous, something intoxicating. And I hated that part of me didn't want it to stop. The shift between us was so subtle at first I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But the world noticed before I could deny it. At a charity auction 3 nights later, the cameras caught Alexander's hand pressed against the small of my back as he leaned down to whisper something that made me laugh. Laugh. The woman who had perfected the art of standing beside him with a polite smile suddenly couldn't hide the way her lips curved, and every flashbulb seemed to catch it. "You're glowing," a socialite remarked to me as she sipped her champagne. "Marriage must be treating you well." I nearly choked on my drink. Before I could respond, Alexander appeared at my side, his arm slipping easily around my waist, the heat of his palm searing through the silk of my dress. "She deserves nothing less," he said smoothly, his tone making my skin prickle. The woman tittered and excused herself, but I was left staring at him, wide-eyed. "What was that?" I hissed as soon as we were alone. He smirked, his thumb brushing against my hip like he knew exactly what it was doing to me. "What? The truth?" My pulse jumped. "You don't mean that." He leaned down, his lips hovering by my ear, his voice low and deliberate. "Don't I?" The night ended in a blur of forced smiles and whispered promises I wasn't sure he intended me to believe. But when we got home, the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it thickened, weighing heavy in the air of the penthouse. I tried to escape to my room, but his voice stopped me cold. Diana. I froze, my hand on the doorknob, his tone threading through me like silk and steel all at once. Slowly, I turned. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, tie loosened, glass of whiskey in hand, the city sprawling behind him like a kingdom he ruled effortlessly. But his eyes weren't on the skyline. They were on me. "You wear that mask so well," he said quietly, swirling the amber liquid. "I sometimes wonder if you even remember who you are without it." My breath hitched. "And what about you?" "The Empire's perfect heir, untouchable Alexander. Do you even know who you are without the mask?" His lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. He set the glass down, crossing the room toward me with measured steps that made my pulse trip over itself. "You think you see through me?" He stopped just close enough for the heat of his body to reach mine, his gaze pinning me in place. "Maybe you do. But you don't get to pretend you don't feel this." My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into my palms. "Feel what?" I whispered, my voice betraying me with its tremor. His eyes darkened, his jaw flexing. "This pull. This fire. You can deny it all you want, Diana, but it's written all over you every time you look at me." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. For a moment, silence stretched between us, taut and suffocating. Then, with a restraint I could almost feel breaking inside him, he stepped back. "Go ahead," he said softly, almost bitterly. "Run to your room. Pretend none of this is happening. But it won't make it any less real." And then he left me standing in the middle of the room, shaking, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. That night, I dreamt of his words, his eyes, his nearness, and when I woke, the sheets tangled around me felt like chains I couldn't break free from. I tried to drown it out. I told myself his words were nothing more than a tactic, another way to rattle me the way he always had. But the lie crumbled each time I stepped into a room and felt his gaze latch onto me, hot and unyielding, like he could strip away every layer of armor I wore. The board dinner made it worse. We were seated side by side at the long mahogany table, executives and investors hanging on every word Alexander spoke. His hand brushed mine under the table, just once, a fleeting contact no one else could see, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. I pulled away quickly, but his lips curved ever so slightly, as though he knew exactly the effect he had. When the dinner ended, we moved into the hall, the low murmur of voices and clinking glasses echoing around us. Daniel was there. His presence was like a shadow from my past, a reminder of every insult and humiliation I had endured before Alexander. He looked me up and down, his smirk dripping with disdain. "Still playing the dutiful wife, Diana? Must be exhausting, pretending you belong here." Before I could retort, Alexander stepped forward, his voice cool and cutting. "Careful, Daniel. You don't get to speak to my wife like that." The way he said wife, it wasn't careless. It wasn't performative. It was laced with something fierce, something protective that made my chest ache in ways I couldn't explain. Daniel scoffed, but I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes before he slunk away. I exhaled, but before relief could wash over me, Alexander's hand wrapped firmly around mine, pulling me into a side corridor away from the crowd. His grip was strong, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with an intensity that made my knees weaken. "You let him talk to you like that again and I swear," his voice cracked with something raw, something dangerous. "Is that a bruise?" The growl in his tone made my stomach flip, his gaze locked on the faint mark Daniel's grip had left on my arm earlier in the evening when no one was watching. I tried to pull back, but his hold only tightened. "It's nothing," I whispered, my voice trembling. His jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling like a man barely holding back a storm. "Tell me who hurt you." His words were molten, a command and a plea tangled together. I should have laughed it off, should have thrown his hypocrisy in his face, but I couldn't. Because for the first time, I realized the fury in his eyes wasn't about control. It was about me. He released my wrist only to cup my face, tilting my chin so I couldn't look away. The world fell away, the noise of the gala dimming into silence as his thumb brushed against my cheek with shocking tenderness. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" he whispered, his breath hot against my skin, his body caging mine against the wall. My heart thundered so loud I was certain he could hear it, and before I could speak, before I could even think, he leaned closer, so close I could taste the whiskey on his lips, and then someone's footsteps echoed down the corridor, breaking the moment like shattered glass. He froze, his forehead pressing against mine for one lingering second before he pulled back, his expression a war between restraint and desire. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving me trembling in the shadows, breathless and shaken, caught between wanting to run and wanting to chase after him. I didn't see him the rest of the night. He disappeared into the crowd of power brokers and society darlings, his mask of composure firmly back in place, while I was left reeling, every nerve in my body still alive from the way he'd pinned me to that wall. By the time we returned home, the silence between us was unbearable. I went straight to my room, desperate to shut the door, to shut him out, but a hand shot out and stopped it before it closed. Alexander stepped inside, his eyes storm-dark, his tie already undone like he'd been pacing, restless. "We're not pretending anymore," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. I crossed my arms, defiant even as my pulse betrayed me. "Pretending is what we agreed on, remember? Indifference, appearances, nothing more." He stalked toward me, each step deliberate, his gaze locked on mine. "You think indifference looks like this?" He caught my wrist, pulling me closer, my breath hitching as his chest brushed mine. "Like me losing my mind every time someone else touches you? Like me not being able to sleep because the only thing I can think about is you?" My lips parted, but no sound came out. His confession slammed into me with the force of something I hadn't dared imagine. I tried to muster control, but my voice cracked. "Why now? Why say this now?" His jaw flexed, his thumb tracing the inside of my wrist with infuriating gentleness. "Because watching you slip further away every day is killing me. Because I can't stand the thought of you believing you're anything less than mine." My chest burned, every word igniting something I'd buried deep. But anger rose too, sharp and defensive. "You can't just decide when to care, Alexander. You don't get to flip a switch." His hand slid up my arm, cupping the side of my neck, tilting my head back so I had to meet his eyes. "This isn't a switch," he said fiercely. "It's been there from the start, Diana. I just fought it. Buried it. Pretended I didn't want what I couldn't have. But I can't keep lying." His honesty left me unmoored, my walls crumbling. I should have pushed him away. Instead, I whispered, "And what if I don't want to be your possession?" His lips curved, not in amusement but in something darker, hungrier. "Then prove me wrong. Walk away now." His thumb brushed my pulse, daring me. My body screamed to stay, but pride chained me still. I pulled back just enough to break his touch, my voice shaking. "You don't get to command me like one of your boardrooms. If this is real, prove it. Not with words, not with jealousy. With something that actually matters." His eyes blazed, his expression shifting from frustration to something resolute. He nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting a challenge. "Then watch me," he said, voice low with promise. And just like that, he left my room, closing the door behind him, leaving me trembling in the silence. But this time, for the first time since we married, I wasn't just shaking with anger. I was trembling with anticipation of what he would do next. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope over fire. Alexander wasn't the same. He didn't hover, didn't crowd, but everywhere I turned, I felt him. At a luncheon, he placed his hand at the small of my back in front of half the city's elite, protective, steady, undeniable. At the board meeting, when an investor tried to talk over me, Alexander's voice cut like a blade. Finish, Diana, he ordered the room, not me, making every pair of eyes swing my way. Even at home, small things shifted. My favorite coffee appeared at the breakfast table. My car was waiting with the seat adjusted just the way I liked. None of it was loud, none of it was dramatic. But it was deliberate. And maddening. Because I had dared him to prove it, and he was. Step by step, brick by brick, he was dismantling the walls I'd spent months building. The breaking point came at a gala, one of the Empire's most public nights. Cameras flashed as we entered arm in arm, my gown shimmering under the lights, his hand anchored firmly at my waist. We were halfway through the evening when Daniel appeared, smug and venomous as ever. He raised his glass toward me, smirking in full view of everyone. Diana, he drawled, I see you've perfected the art of pretending. Tell me, how long until your husband gets bored? Gasps rippled, flashes exploded. I felt the room's weight press against me, waiting for my humiliation. But before I could respond, Alexander stepped forward, his voice lethal silk. You really want to talk about pretending, Daniel? Tell them who propped up your failing companies. Tell them who bankrolled your lies. The crowd stilled. Daniel paled. Alexander's arm tightened around me, his presence towering, unshakable. This is my wife, he declared, voice carrying across the hall. Not for show. Not for convenience. She is mine, and anyone who doubts that can consider themselves my enemy. The words slammed through the room like a gauntlet thrown, and Daniel's smirk vanished as whispers spread like wildfire. For the first time, no one was laughing at me. No one doubted me. I wasn't a pawn. I was the woman standing at Alexander's side, and for once, he wasn't just playing the part, he meant it. Cameras captured everything, and the Empire would feast on the declaration. But all I could focus on was his hand gripping mine, the thundering truth in his voice, and the way my heart betrayed me by racing with something dangerously close to hope. And later that night, when the lights faded and we returned home, I knew the confrontation I had demanded was no longer avoidable. The car ride home was silent, but not empty. Every breath felt charged, every glance stolen in the dark glass window was met with his reflection watching me. When the doors shut behind us in the mansion, I turned to escape up the stairs, but Alexander's voice caught me, raw and edged with something I'd never heard from him before. You asked me to prove it. I've done everything but bleed in front of you, Diana. Tell me, what will it take for you to believe me? His words rooted me in place. Slowly, I faced him, my gown still glittering from the gala, but my defenses worn thin. I don't want grand declarations in public, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I want the truth when it's just us. When no one's watching. Do you even know what that means? He strode closer, but this time not like a predator cornering prey. His movements were careful, deliberate, almost vulnerable. He stopped just shy of touching me, his voice low. It means this. That I've wanted you from the beginning. That every time I called this arrangement convenient, it was a lie to protect myself. That when I saw you smile at another man tonight, I wanted to rip the world apart just to make sure you never doubted who you belong with. And not because of some empire. Because of me. My breath hitched. My walls crumbled. I whispered, you've always made me feel like I was a placeholder. His expression shattered with something close to pain. You were never second, Diana. Never. I was too proud, too cowardly to admit what I felt. But I've admired you since before you ever agreed to marry me. Silence hung between us, heavier than any ballroom. Then he lifted a hand, tentative, like he was waiting for me to reject him, and brushed his knuckles along my cheek. Say the word, he murmured. Push me away, and I'll stop. But if you feel even half of what I do, I cut him off, surging forward, my lips crashing against his. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then his arms closed around me, pulling me in like he'd been starving for this moment. The kiss wasn't polished or practiced. It was years of tension, anger, denial, all breaking apart into something fierce and real. When we finally broke apart, breathless, he pressed his forehead against mine. "No more pretending," he whispered. I nodded, my voice trembling but certain. "No more pretending." And for the first time since our marriage began, I knew exactly where we stood, not as strangers trapped in duty, but as two people who had finally stopped lying to themselves and each other.